Okay, let's unpack this. We are setting the scene in the ancient world, but the psychological conflict we're talking about today feels timeless.
It really does.
I mean, you're listening to the story of a man born into slavery who becomes a prince, only to then become a murderer and finally an exiled shepherd.
That paradox is the engine of the entire narrative, isn't it? This deep dive is focused squarely on the dramatic, often contradictory beginnings of Moses.
Right.
We aren't here for the plagues or the Ten Commandments, not yet. Our mission is really to trace those earliest, most pivotal moments that shaped the identity of this singular figure.
And we've compiled the source material detailing, the desperate circumstances, these ingenious acts of survival, and the moments of profound and very costly choice that define him before he ever received a divine calling.
Exactly.
It's a roadmap of how privilege and suffering can just clash inside one person.
Precisely. And for you, the listener, we're trying to extract the essential nuggets of insight here. How do impossible odds and forced displacement actually create character? How does a man navigate two completely opposing worlds, the enslaved and the enslaver, before forging a completely new identity as an outsider? That's what we really need to trace.
So let's start at the absolute bottom, the time of that decree against male infants.
Terrible time.
The sources tell us that a man and a woman of the house of Levi had a son. There's no fanfare, no big announcement, just a family doing what families do under the most terrible duress.
And the terror is immediate. His very birth is a death sentence from the get-go. But the source adds this really wonderful detail. When his mother saw he was a goodly child, she made a choice.
It goes beyond just maternal instinct, right?
Absolutely. She committed to an act of outright rebellion against Pharaoh's decree. She hides him for 3 full months.
3 months. Can you imagine? 3 months of trying to keep a baby silent. The constant anxiety, knowing that discovery means death for the child and who knows what for the family.
But you can't do it forever.
No. Secrecy fails. The source says she could not longer hide him. So she has to transition from hiding him indoors to, trusting him to providence, I guess.
And this is where we see that ingenuity born of pure necessity. This isn't just, floating a baby down a river. She prepares an ark of bulrushes, those sturdy reeds.
Right.
But the construction is what fascinates me. She makes it watertight by daubing it with slime and with pitch.
Slime and pitch. It sounds so primitive.
It is. This isn't a nursery product. It's improvised slave technology. They're using bitumen, the pitch, which is a highly effective sealant, and mud, the slime. It shows that even in bondage, there was knowledge and skill.
To give this vulnerable little vessel the best chance of survival.
Exactly. Laid right there on the flags by the river's brink. It was a tiny, deliberate act of hope.
And that hope required incredible courage from the whole family. We often forget about the sister's role in this.
Oh, it's critical. The source says his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done to him. Imagine that vigil, a young girl standing in the distance, just watching the river, hoping for a miracle.
And ready to act. That's the key. Ready to act in an instant if one appeared.
And it pays off immediately.
In a move that feels less like coincidence and more like divine appointment, let's say. Pharaoh's daughter comes down to wash herself at the river.
Of all the people.
Right. She spots this strange basket among the reeds and sends her maid to go get it.
The tension in that moment is it's almost unbearable. When the lid is open, the babe wept.
And that sound, that universal cry of distress, it just breaks through all the political and legal barriers.
It does. The princess had compassion on him, and she immediately knows what's going on. She says, this is one of the Hebrews' children. She chooses empathy over empire, right then and there.
That choice of compassion is stunning. But the sister, watching from the riverbank, she moves with, tactical brilliance.
It's a flawless piece of social engineering is what it is.
Yes. She steps out of the shadows and says, effectively, hey, would you like me to find a qualified Hebrew nurse for you?
It's an incredible move because she completely inverts the power structure. She frames it not as charity for a desperate slave family, but as a convenience for a royal person.
And the princess agrees. She says yes. So the sister goes and calls the child's own mother.
The ultimate unbelievable twist.
You couldn't write it. Pharaoh's daughter instructs the mother, her slave, to take the baby, nurse him, and then promises to give her wages.
So the woman who risked her life to hide her son is now officially, legally, being paid by the very regime that wanted him dead to raise him.
The irony is just staggering.
And it creates this foundational duality in him. He is nursed by his true mother. He's learning his heritage, probably absorbing the language and the stories of his people. But then when he's grown, he's brought back to the princess and became her son.
And the naming solidifies it all. Moses. Because, she says, I drew him out of the water.
So he's Hebrew by biology, but he's Egyptian by status, by language, by culture.
This dual identity is the critical lens through which he sees the world. I mean, he has the intellectual training and status of an Egyptian prince, but he has the visceral awareness of his people's suffering.
He understands the architecture of power because he lives inside the palace, but he carries the pain of the slave quarters.
And that conflict,
Yeah.
it can't hold forever. It has to break at some point.
And it does. This brings us to the next massive pivot point. The sources tell us when Moses was grown, he takes the deliberate, self-initiated action. He went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens.
He didn't just casually observe it. He actively sought out the reality of the oppression.
That's the choice right there.
Yeah.
He deliberately chose to look past his princely comfort and engage with the misery.
And that engagement leads directly to a sudden, violent, pivotal act. He sees an Egyptian smiting in Hebrew one of his brethren.
This is the explosion of that internal tension. He acts as a defender of his bloodline, but he does so covertly. The source is very clear about the secrecy of the act.
It says he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand.
It's a spontaneous, vigilante killing. It's driven by a sense of justice, but it's carried out in the dark. It is treason against the crown that raised him.
He gambled his entire life on the secrecy of that one moment.
A gamble that fails in less than 24 hours. He must have assumed he was secure, but the revelation comes not from an Egyptian guard, but from the very people he sought to defend.
The next day, he finds two Hebrews striving together. He steps into the role he thinks is his, that of prince and judge, and he tries to mediate. He asks, "Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow?"
And the wrongdoer, one of his own brethren, delivers the most devastating rebuke imaginable. This is the moment his secret identity is exposed and just brutally rejected.
The quote is just damning.
Oh.
"Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killedst the Egyptian?"
Ugh. That one line, it undoes everything.
It's a total loss of belonging. He tried to claim his Hebrew identity through violence, and they just reject him. They see him as an outsider trying to be their ruler.
So he immediately realizes, surely this thing is known, and he fears. The walls of his life just collapse.
His princely status was his protection, but once he shed Egyptian blood, that status became totally irrelevant. Pharaoh hears, and he sought to slay Moses.
And just like that, he transitions from the adopted son of the most powerful man in the world to a desperate fugitive. His entire world is lost.
He loses the palace, he loses the status, and he even loses the allegiance of the people he risked it all for. He is truly alone.
And so he has to flee from the face of Pharaoh.
The distance he puts between himself and Egypt is geographic, sure, but it's also a complete reversal of his fortune.
And that brings us to the psychological geography of this third phase, exile, and the radical transformation into the stranger in a strange land.
He flees across the desert, arrives in Midian, and sits down by a well.
The well. It's such a symbolic setting in these narratives, isn't it? A place of meeting, of transition, of starting anew.
And immediately, even as a fugitive, Moses slips back into that protective role.
He does. He encounters the 7 daughters of the priest of Midian who are trying to water their father's flock. And when the shepherds came and drove them away, Moses, showing that core sense of justice.
He stood up and helped them and watered their flock.
He's still using that physical presence and authority he likely picked up in Egypt to defend the weak. But what's so fascinating is how he is seen by others. He still carried the marks of his upbringing.
How so?
Well, when the daughters return to rule their father, they report that they were helped by an unexpected figure. Their exact words are, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds."
Wow, an Egyptian. He still looks Egyptian.
Yeah.
His clothes, his bearing, maybe his unfamiliarity with desert customs, it all just screams outsider from the Nile.
Right. Even in exile, he cannot fully shake the identity that he just shed through treason and murder.
But Reuel, the father, he sees the substance of the man, not just the surface appearance. He invites him to eat bread.
And Moses finds refuge. He settles down, and the source says he was content to dwell with the man, eventually marrying his daughter Zipporah.
This contentment, this settling for a simple life, is profoundly important. He went from, what, expecting the throne of Egypt to accepting life as a simple foreign shepherd.
Exactly. And then they have a son, and the naming of that child completely defines his new adopted identity.
What's the name?
The son is named Gershom, and Moses himself provides this powerful, reflective explanation for the name. Quoting the source, he says, "I have been a stranger in a strange land."
That's it. That's the definitive moment of self-definition. He no longer sees himself as a prince, or maybe even fully as a Hebrew. He is the outsider, the refugee, the stranger.
It's a complete acceptance of displacement. The man raised in the comfort of a palace with all the knowledge and power of the empire now willingly defines himself by his lack of belonging.
And that humility, that rootlessness,
Yeah.
it becomes the basis for his future leadership.
And this period of quiet, rooted exile is crucial because while Moses is finding sort of peace in Midian, the clock is still ticking back in Egypt.
Things aren't getting better there.
Not at all. We are told that in process of time, the king of Egypt died.
You might think a new pharaoh would mean a new policy, but the suffering is just. It's cemented into the system. The source emphasizes that the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and their cry came up unto God.
The systems of oppression were relentless, regardless of the individual man on the throne.
So if we connect this whole journey to the bigger picture, what's the takeaway?
This is the moment of synthesis. While Moses is becoming a shepherd, learning patience and humility in the silence of Midian, his people are crying out in loud desperation.
The two paths are converging.
Exactly. God heard their groaning and fundamentally remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. The ultimate intervention is framed by that memory.
So it wasn't just a response to a new emergency, it was the fulfillment of an ancient promise. God had respect unto them.
So what does this all mean for the arc of leadership? The sources show Moses' chaotic journey, from foundling to prince, through violence into humility. It wasn't a distraction. It was the essential preparation.
It was necessary.
It was. His forced flight and his decades in exile stripped him of arrogance and privilege, aligning him perfectly with the moment that ultimate power looked upon the suffering of his people. He had to become fully acquainted with what it meant to be powerless and alone before he could lead others to freedom.
That really is the power of these early chapters, the miraculous rescue, the self-destructive defense of his people, and the forced contentment of exile. These paradoxical shifts define the foundation of his entire mission.
And here is the final provocative thought for you to consider based on this deep dive into the source material. The narrative insists that the man destined to lead the Exodus lost everything: home, status, and safety before he was ready. So what does this suggest about the requirement for true leadership?
Yeah.
Does great purpose sometimes necessitate a complete radical stripping away of all worldly attachments, forcing one to identify fully as a stranger in a strange land before that purpose can be fulfilled? Think about the value of the wilderness in forging character.